Mhm.
Well, good morning, everyone. A few people have joined us. Can I just check the audio? Is everybody able to hear me okay? Someone type into the Q&A box if they're able to hear all right. Very good. Thank you, Annie. Thanks, Ben. Good. I hope everyone's well on this Friday morning. We are expecting another 20 or so we'll give them just a moment to join us. So hang tight. Get that extra bit of coffee. Good morning, everyone who's joining. We're still a handful short, so we will get cracking in just a moment. All right, well, we'll get started. So thanks for joining us. I imagine we'll have quite a few more joining us as the morning progresses, but we'll start so we can end on time as well. So game-changing talent development. Use data, stop guessing. So in 2019, some recent research has come out that's talked about what's important to senior directors, CEOs, and board members. This recent data suggests that there's two things that are really top of mind for these individuals, which is strategy development and talent strategy. And it's really quite a big gap between those topics and some of the other items on the list from the research. And so thinking through why did those two things rise to the top and reading through some of the comments, it's pretty clear that everyone's awake now to the fact that the environment is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And as a result, the old sort of structures and processes around strategy and around talent and really around how the business serves the customer aren't keeping up very well. And so these two topics, rose to the top as a sort of a recognition that to get to a more agile business, there needs to be different talent going forward. And that's also congruent with what we see with our clients. So in many of our clients, we find that the senior leadership team has to drag the quarterly results across the line every quarter. Personally, they lack a bench strength. They lack two ICs and the group that's kind of underneath them. And interestingly, many senior leaders look at the group of leaders below them and they're waiting for them to step up. So what we experience is very consistent with some of this research. So interestingly, we found as well that the funding is going to continue. 95% of respondents said that the budgets for leadership development, talent development will continue year on year, or in fact even grow. And yet Gartner tells us from last year's 2018 research that 27% of these high potential programs don't show a return. So if we recap, what are we finding here? It's clearly pretty important, very important. In fact, funding is going to continue at or above the current level, and yet the vast majority of the programs aren't yielding a return. So this is going to be an interactive session. So you've got colleagues whom you've not yet met who you can probably learn from, and we're here to learn from each other this morning. So there's a couple ways that we will participate together. The first way is by Q&A. So somewhere on your Zoom toolbar, that black toolbar, you see a button called Q&A. And my colleague Carolyn's going to facilitate the Q&A. So let's do a bit of a practice and get everyone warmed up. So there's the statistic again. So in your experience, why is it that only 27% of high potential programs will yield a return? So go ahead now, and in your experience, what do you see as falling down? Type that into the Q&A window, and then as things pop up, Carolyn will let us know, and maybe there's some items in there we can learn from. Again, pop on that Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar, usually a black toolbar, and let us know why is it these programs don't show a return.
So Annie says, lack of commitment post-programs to implement learnings or strategies.
Yeah, very good. Certainly see that.
Yeah, Jessica says because every hypo has different development needs. Ricky says poor execution, lack of commitment, accountability, lack of communication. Ben, ROI is not often linked to programs, possibly more about lack of reporting and measurements.
Right, yeah, well, you're not going to get it if you don't try to measure it, are you? That's a good point, Ben.
Kim makes a similar point. So outcomes not measured and connection is missing with senior leaders as well.
Great. We'll keep those coming, but what we find is that, as we've said, it's not necessarily connected to the strategy. So in other words, we worked with a client 2 years ago who had a high potential program running, And in parallel, they had an expansion into Asia going as a major part of their three-part strategy. And those two things had no relationship to one another. Second, we find that the programs are one size fits all. And so while, yes, we do want to develop a cohort together, that gives us scale, it gives us a networking opportunity for that cohort, but also there's a lack of individualized development within the high potential group. And then finally, our finding is that there's very little data in the environment. So let's explore how we can do better. Now we're going to do a poll. And in fact, some of you, many of you, thank you for your pre-webinar responses. So we asked you 3 questions. We said, hey, where are you on the journey right now? And you can see we've got a good spread of people on the phone and on the line. Everywhere from, hey, we've yet to start, to the bulk of people are designing the program, all the way on the right-hand side to actually we're measuring these benefits and ROI. So that's what you told us before the webinar. Secondly, we were interested to see what sort of constraints are you running up against? And again, great spread here. So everything from managers not taking talent development seriously to lack of budget, which certainly ties to the CEO not being engaged, I reckon. And then no constraints. So there's a certain group who actually feel very unconstrained, which is fantastic. The bulk of people are saying we're not exactly sure what the talent priorities are. And then finally, an open-ended response from you suggesting, what would a great program or system look like? So some good stuff in here that you contributed about promotion of participants and how long it takes to kind of move out of high potential and into promotion pathways, number of times being promoted. And then there's a thread of feedback as well saying, hey, it's got to be relevant, simple, effective, and integrated. And that integrated piece is one that we really stress in our work with clients, is that to make this actually work as well as it can, it takes contributions from different groups, different activities, all needs to be woven together and integrated. So that's a big theme for our work with our clients. So in the spirit of continued collaboration with you on the webinar, we'd like to do a poll now. And we're going to ask you, how do you rate the current organization's leadership pipeline? So you should have a polling window in front of you. And just let us know, where are you? Are you strong? Still need some work? Maybe you started, or maybe actually it's an issue. Getting some votes in now. So about half of you have voted, a little more than half, creeping up. We'll give it just one more moment. I think there's still 2 or 3 who have yet to vote, so cast your votes. Right now, it looks like still needs work is the clear front runner. So amongst those that are on the call this morning, most of you are saying it still needs work. So successors are identified and being groomed. Most middle managers have 2 ICs, and that unexpected vacancies can be a bit tricky, but aren't necessarily crippling. Thank you for your votes. So again, everyone said it still needs work, could be better. There's the results. Just make that nice and official. So good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Miller, I'm a senior partner here at Lighthouse. And my real passion is to design to work with clients to design, develop, and deliver talent programs that make a measurable difference to the business. And I'm a bit measurement obsessed, you might say, so that's my real, what I really want to contribute back to the industry is measurement and discipline and the ability to not just measure ROI, but understand if we're in the middle of a 12-month program, is it working at month 3? And if it's not, then what are we going to tune up based upon some data and insight to make it more effective in those remaining 9 months? So that's my passion, and obviously I'm delighted to be with you here this morning. So Lighthouse is the name of our firm, and we work to provide proven pathways. And what that really means is that we work with our clients to understand quite clearly where we are today and paint a very clear picture of where we want to be, both at an organization, at a team, and at an individual level. So, and that B sort of point, that destination point for us includes the definition of specific behaviors that we're trying to shift in a specific audience for a specific purpose that's mapped to the strategy. So we're about building capability and changing behavior. Let me introduce you to a few characters we're going to get to know in the next half hour together. This is Claire. So Claire is the managing director of a really fast-growing Australian software firm. You can see the firm is growing and in fact has some Asian entries planned for about a year from now. The leadership team's still relatively new. In her mind, they're doing pretty okay, but the bench strength is a challenge. And she knows, you know, kind of at the 2 and 3 levels deep level in the organization, there are some key flight risks. She's also concerned there's some silos emerging. It's never been an issue for the business because they've been entrepreneurial and rather flat. She's finding now with the growth that there are some silos emerging. And there's something happening in DevOps, which has her concerned. She doesn't know exactly what it is, but some of the productivity has started to suffer and some of the customer quality has started to suffer. And like most MDs, there's a new investor, and so there's a bit more impatience coming from the investment community that she's needing to respond to. So our second character is Hugh. So Hugh started his career at Microsoft. He's been with this software co in Australia now for a few years and has recently been promoted to HR director, which in fact is a new role in the business. He just finished a couple of weeks back a really critical board meeting. And at that board meeting, he got a mandate from the board to accelerate the bench strength and accelerate the talent pipeline. His other priority is, because the firm is very much a show me with data and then we'll decide culture, he must use data and insight in this entire process. And he's quite comfortable doing that, but those are the 2 priorities that he's agreed with the board. He's got targets now set to grow the pipeline in a measurable way over the next 12 and 24 months. Those are his 2 time frames, and he has targets on each of those 2 time horizons. And third and finally, let's look at Joel. So Joel is the DevOps lead. He's now reporting to what used to be a peer of his. He's been with this software company for a year and a half. For the most part, he has smashed it. More recently, he's been a bit distracted. He's not feeling as connected to the future of the business as he once did. And privately, he's considering an offer that's come across his desk at Google. So those are our 3 characters. Let's have a look now. Let's see how Hugh, our HR director, is tackling this challenge. So Hugh gets started, and what he decides to do is he's going to crowdsource, if you like, in the business, some principles. And so he aggregates these principles, and he's clearly leading it, but he is trying to make sure there's a lot of buy-in throughout the organization. And the principles that he settled on are these. First, there need to be some foundation capabilities. So as this organization scales into a new geography, into the new markets in Asia, he knows that each individual is going to need to demonstrate more personal leadership, which is the ability to manage oneself and be really clear about one's own values so that you can be really authentic in how you lead. Second, because there's going to be so much unexpected, uncertainty, ambiguity, all those things, a growth mindset is going to be critical for the entire population. And so he said, hey, that's going to be a plank of my program. And because he came from Microsoft, he is keenly aware of the success that Satya and the team at Microsoft have had, really architecting the Microsoft business across growth mindset. Because he came from there, he knows it, he wants to use it here. And lastly, he's in a somewhat contrarian view. He's not pretending like he knows what the third capability is. Who knows what's going to be needed in 6 weeks, less 6 months. So he's going to let the data inform him. A few of the other principles, from an individual perspective, he knows that people really struggle to individually reflect on what they need to do and develop. He wants to build in some individual reflection and some individual data on which to reflect and then set some objectives. He wants to move it to a very much intrinsic motivation sort of environment where people are choosing what they're doing on a quarter-by-quarter basis. He knows that if the managers and mentors aren't involved, it's going to pretty well fall flat, so that's a key thing for him. And then lastly, especially because these silos have started to crop up in the business, he wants and needs to develop a cross-functional group. So he's starting in this first year with a cohort of 25 high potentials across the business, from every function is represented. And he's laid this out in the following model that he's used with the board, and this is the model that he's used to go and source ideas from the organization. So from an individual perspective, my pathway, my development priorities, my scorecard, so there's going to need to be a lot of individualization. At a cohort level, clearly we need to be working on real projects, real business problems, and developing that network across the cohort. We've talked about the data, so it has to be measurable, and individually there has to be a clear sense of progression so I can maintain my motivation. But also at a cohort level, we need to understand, is it working? Are we seeing a shift? And then lastly, the ability within this kind of first year program to evolve, not only with the business as it evolves, but as each leader evolves. So let's have a look then at what he has come up with in terms of the getting started. So to get it moving, Hugh and Claire are partnering with an external provider, and they work together to define the capability framework. So we've chosen growth mindset and personal leadership, and we know that there's room, there's budget, there's space for a third, but we don't know what that third one is going to be yet. So as we get into the framework, there's specific observable behaviors for each of these capabilities. So you can just see a few of the ones there that Hugh's come up with around personal leadership. And so why is it important that these are specific and observable? Well, it's because the measurement process and platform that Hugh has chosen to work with relies on observable behavior. And each individual in the cohort is going to get feedback on a frequent basis about how well they're demonstrating these behaviors. And obviously, when you get the data, you then have the ability to make some choices, do some things different to be more and more effective. So these observable behaviors are really the bedrock of what Hugh is trying to architect. So let's have a quick look at how this lays out. So what kind of program has Hugh started with? So we know that growth mindset's fundamental, and Hugh and Claire and everyone are convinced that that is the right thing. Hugh has architected, we talked earlier about integration. So he's got a four stream program going. The individual, the cohort, the leaders and mentors who are interacting with those individuals, and then HR, so his team, as well as the business in this case. He's then decided on a quarterly cadence because that matches so much of what else they do in the business. So within each quarter, there's some specific focus areas. Now at the bottom, you can see this thing called Succeed. So Succeed is a platform and a process that's going to provide the behavior shift data. So we've identified those 5 behaviors that we've spoken of a moment ago. And this is the cadence by which every individual gets information from really a 360-degree view about how they're delivering on those behaviors. So it's really quick. From a rater perspective, it takes 2 or 3 minutes. You do it on your smartphone. It's meant to be very, very rapid in the way that we're able to get this feedback in the hands of the individual leader. So in Q1, this is what Hugh's got on tap. So quite a detailed 360 assessment for every individual. You can see as well that the leaders and mentors are going to have their own workshop for how they need to be interacting with the participants. So there's some real clarity there about their roles as leaders and mentors and how they, in fact, can use this data to have much more effective coaching, leadership, and mentoring conversations. And then every quarter, at the bottom, you see that Hugh is going to be reviewing the data that comes out and trying to pull out of that data the insights. At an individual level, you can see that each individual is going to be reflecting on their own individual data in a structured way to then determine their focus for the quarter. And then through the period as well, there's some business projects being worked on as a cohort, a presentation to kind of a Shark Tank group. And then again, the data aggregates every quarter, from which we again go back into the reflection cycle. So this is what Hugh's got on tap. He believes it's really gonna work, but he's also built in the ability to shift throughout the period based upon the data. And you can see here in Q3 and 4, this is the emerging capability. He doesn't know what it's gonna be yet, but he thinks that there's gonna be room for that and needs to be room for that. So we'll just step out of our scenario then and go into an open Q&A now for a few minutes with you. So the structure that I just put forward, and I'm gonna show it to you again in just a moment. I'd love to have an open conversation via the Q&A box about, number one, is this similar or different to what you're currently working with or considering? And then are there any elements here that you'd like to discuss with your colleagues or with myself as the facilitator? So have a look at this. Hit the Q&A box again, the Q&A button, and just type in there, is this pretty much what you're already doing? Are there some new things, things you're curious about? So just while you're thinking about that, the top layer is the individual layer. So, a lot of reflection and intentional activity, hopefully, is what Hugh wants. And they're reflecting from the bottom stream here about the individual behavior comments they're getting from their colleagues, their boss, their peers, their direct reports. So that's the fuel or the raw material from which they then go into this reflection cycle. So pop into Q&A if there's something that you want to discuss.
So Jessica says this program brings the leader and mentor into the program more, which is something that they're looking to do more in their organization going forward.
Great. Yeah, it's a really important point, Jessica. And oftentimes, not only aren't they supporting what we're trying to do, but they don't know exactly how we want them to support. And so we've had great success with these kickoff, really short. We don't want to make it too burdensome, but helping them understand exactly what we want from them in the work. Anything else? So if you've just joined us, this is a program flow that our fictitious software company has come up with for years of talent development. Anything here you want to discuss?
Ben's asked if we could speak a little bit more on core capability. What does that look like as you learn what the capability is and then what's happening, moving into a plan for new roles and creating individual plans?
Great. So these core capabilities, what we've chosen, what Hugh has chosen to start with, he really believes that this capability of career navigation is where he wants to start in Q1. And that's because he needs these individuals in the cohort to take control of their own careers. And this is really the piece where he's going to help them understand their own values so that they can then lead authentically. So this is the lead yourself sort of capability area, or personal leadership. And then as it relates to, these other core capabilities, they've been working as a cohort on a business project. So they've been, 25, there's 5 groups of 5, they're working on that together. And they're presenting that back to some executives in a Shark Tank style. And then, I guess to get more to your question, Ben, the core capabilities here, these have not been selected yet. So the idea is that they aggregate, Hugh and his team are aggregating all of this data down here from the polling, and not so much at an individual level, but at a cohort level, to identify what's next? What are some feedback from these participants and their stakeholders that say what's a common gap, if you like, across the cohort? And we'll come on to that too as we advance, what actually happened in that story.
A question from Jessica: would the program end after 12 months, or do these hypos remain as talent?
Great. So what Hugh is elected to do is he's going to take a big checkpoint at the end of year 1, and which is what he agreed with the board. There's going to be 2 years of funding and 2 years of activity. At the end of year 1, his current intention is that this group becomes the alumni group for next year's group. Now, he's open to change, Hugh, based upon the data, but his going in position is that it'd be really valuable to have an alumni group.
And Sarah's made a point that she likes the reflection and insight application, and that the fact that it's continuous rather than just after the initial assessment.
Yeah, it's so hard, right? It's very, very challenging for even us on the phone, but for all of our business customers to take and make the space for reflection. And what we found is you have to have a structure by which to do that. And so we're just so glad that Hugh has chosen to work with our structure.
And a question from Annie: how do you assess the integrity of the data and insight of the 360 feedback and polling? She's an advocate herself, but has received feedback as to integrity before. Employers could use it as an opportunity to complain or rate highly their mates. Yeah, no, it's an age-old challenge. And I don't know that we've come up with any brand new ways to deal with that. What perhaps is a bit different about what we're talking here, if I just go back a page, is that what we're polling on is specific behaviors. So if you look at these behaviors, it's a little less open-ended than a typical 360. So it's very specific to how well is an individual, in my opinion, demonstrating these behaviors. So it's very, very focused on those behaviors. And while there is a free text, if you like, to suggest what that individual should do more or less of, we're trying to keep it really laser focused. Thank you for participating. We'll keep those coming. We'll have a chance to do it at the end as well. So we're just going to take a little bit of a tour through some of what Hugh has cooked up. So remember, this is Joel, right? So Joel's our DevOps lead, feeling disconnected from his role, wondering where he fits in. And so in this sense, he's entering into, in Q1, with his talent cohort, he's entering into a workshop and a process called career navigation. And Hugh has chosen this, for the reasons you can see on the right. He really needs these individuals to be developing their own individual leadership, because Hugh knows, and some of these folks don't, but Hugh and the CEO, they know that some of these people are going to be tapped on the shoulder to move to Singapore and probably move to Malaysia, possibly Hong Kong, as they get into their Asian expansion. And so they need to be expanding people's personal capability,
but also they need to be deepening the connection to the organization. So that's what's happening in Q1 with the cohort. And this is one of these core capabilities going back to Ben's question. So that's one of the core capabilities to be building in Q1. And so there's Joel and there's his cohort. So now we're at the end of Q1, and here's Joel again. And Joel has now received some feedback from 6 people in his Raider pool. So he's got some comments from his boss, from 2 peers, and from 3 of his direct reports. Now, Joel is, it's the first time he's actually experienced this kind of feedback. So really, really targeted with some data against it. He's seeing now how he benchmarks against the company benchmark and against his high potential cohort. And because the data it's not that confronting, but he actually needs to value it. That's one of the growth mindset hallmarks, is that we seek out feedback. Growth mindset's all about seeking out feedback, experimenting, and improving. And so what Joel does, although it's a bit challenging for him, he's going to view this as a baseline from which to improve. He's going to say, you know what, it's just one data point, and 7.14 is not bad. Yes, I'm a little bit below my cohort. And he is wondering, why is my personal leadership seen so much lower than my cohort? He's wondering that. And he reckons it's probably because he has been a bit disconnected recently. People's recent experience with him has not been really his best self. So now, at the end of Q2, Joel has had a time to sit with that. He's getting some feedback from his colleagues, and we just pulled one out. You can see it here. People would like to see him demonstrating a better understanding of the big picture and working more collaboratively across the silos and functions. So again, Joel now at the end of Q2, he's reflecting, he's making some action planning personally, he's talking about that with his mentor, and he really is committing to try and understand a bit better what happens upstream and downstream. He's not 100% confident he's going to do it with ease, because it's going to require him to lean on some non-technical skill sets. So he's challenged to apply that growth mindset. So now we're still in Q2. Joel set his intention. He's in the Shark Tank now. He's been working with his 4 colleagues and the other 4 table groups on these business cases around specific business problems. And it's quite interesting. So Claire, the MD, she's part of the Shark Tank. And initially she's like, wow, these guys have done some really good thinking. I'm impressed. As we get to the pointy end of the business cases, though, Claire is a little worried, frankly. She, for whatever reason, thought the group would have a bit more savvy around how the numbers work in their business. They'd have a bit more understanding of how the whole picture works together. And she was concerned about the quality of the business cases and the underlying thinking. She's thinking, gosh, 4 of these people we're going to tap and move to Asia. I don't know. She's a little worried. Now we're at the end of Q2. So this is where Hugh and Claire sit down and look at, okay, what have we learned? We got a couple data points in front of us. So, what we've seen is by the Raider groups, we're seeing some improvements in growth mindset and a little bit of improvement on personal leadership, but maybe that hasn't quite happened yet. So Hugh needs to go understand a little bit more about that. So as he works with his HR business partners, he's encouraging them to try and dig under the covers with people and understand what's going on with that. The feedback also, and the comment specifically that he got from Claire around business acumen, he's starting to think this is the emerging gap. This is the thing that he saved a place for that might be popping up in the cohort. So we're at the end of Q2 at this point, working with some data, and that does start to highlight what he thinks is going to pop up, or has popped up, in fact, as the requirement. So let's move into Q3 now, and lo and behold, there's Joel, our DevOps leader, and the cohort, and they've gone ahead and said, yep, building business acumen is going to be the key core capability to build now for the rest of this fiscal year. So it's really about seeing the bigger picture, being able to understand how my role fits into that picture, having a bit more grace in some cases, and ability to work with my colleagues across the function. So from Joel's perspective, he is going to commit to this. He sees the benefits to it. He commits to his action plan. And in addition now, 5 specific behaviors of business acumen have been added to the polling process. And again, Joel's, this is new stuff. So he's, again, applying that growth mindset and choosing with his manager and his leader and his mentor to take a positive perspective on it. And interestingly, the data and the behaviors on business acumen, again, this is just one poll, one data point, but they demonstrate for the cohort some areas for improvement, but also some things where they probably don't need to invest so much in. So one of the benefits of having 5 behaviors is that you can zero into the 1 or 2 that really require the most attention. Now, let's talk a little bit about how that same data can be helpful. So what you see here, this is Carolyn. Carolyn is one of our high potentials, and she happens to work in HR. So she works for Hugh, the HR director. So in his role now as a mentor, Hugh is working with Carolyn with data. So for the first time, in addition to everything else, Carolyn has received some feedback as part of the process. And interestingly, numbers of her stakeholders are saying that success in her role would be to demonstrate an even stronger partnership and commercial understanding of the business. And that's hard for her to hear. It has really challenged her, and it's really forcing her to, again, strap on that growth mindset because she thought she was doing really well in this area. But again, it gives her something specific to focus on for the next quarter. So she doubles down and tries to apply that. So now let's go to the end of Q3. We're moving very quickly through a year, which is great. So now at the end of Q3, Hugh and Claire, the MD, sit down, and it's time to get an update together for the board as it relates to how we're going building this bench strength. And they want to update their scorecard. And what they find is that they've actually made some progress. So this is a board reporting scorecard that you probably would recognize. And while it doesn't look like there's been a lot of progress made, actually it was even more red and even more amber before. And interestingly, through the period, Claire's nervousness about the DevOps team has been reduced because it seems clear to everyone that Joel has recommitted. So Joel has not elected to pursue that thing with Google. He's feeling it now once again with this group and is kind of secretly now wondering if he might have an opportunity to move his young family to Singapore. So he's pretty jazzed, actually. And so let's go back to Joel. Now we're at the top of Q4. He's got a lot of data under his belt to think through. And so this data is trended and it's comparative to his colleagues, etc. And he, in fact, after reviewing that and having a good think about it, he goes and he actually requests that stretch assignment. So he wants to be first in line to get to Singapore. He says, look, I know where the business is heading. My family and I are keen to go, so how can we make this happen? Which is exactly what Hugh wanted. When we set up the whole program, we wanted people to take control of their careers, be connected to the organization, and demonstrate proactively their alignment to the firm. So Hugh's really happy with that. We're at the end of our program now. So 12 months have passed. We have got even more data to look at, and the trends are good. There's some things still to work on, clearly, but Hugh now can take this data and work with it, as well as the outcomes that these leaders have generated, draw some correlations, and have a really robust kind of data-informed conversation with Claire and with the board about how that first year's investment has gone. The business acumen piece, one data point, it's really quite low. And so that really does demonstrate the siloed nature of the business. and they reckon that that's the place they need to double down on as they get ready to go into Asia. So before they start expanding internationally, they think they've got to get some more process in place to get the silos working better together. So I hope you see how in the introduction to our time this morning, we talked about integration. We talked about how the various pieces need to work together. We talked about data, and we were hoping to guess a little bit less and use data a little bit more to make decisions. So I'm hoping this came to life for you. We did go really quickly, so I'm going to reopen that conversation that we were having just a minute ago in the QA, and we'll spend another 5 or 6 minutes looking back at the program and just see where you have questions, comments, if there's anything in there you want to double click on and learn more about or ask some questions maybe from your colleagues about. So click on the black Q&A box and let us know. And if there's something there that was too quick as well that you want to revisit, more than happy to dive back into one of them. So I see a couple folks have just joined since the last Q&A. So previously when we looked at this kind of roadmap here, there was some discussion on the intentional reflection and applying insights. So there's a couple of people on the webinar this morning who thought that was interesting and important to give people space and structure with which to do that. We talked about what would a core capability look like and how might you go about identifying what a core capability is required.
And actually our first question is about that and whether we can elaborate on that a little bit more, how you go about identifying the core behaviors and capabilities for the program or whether they're set.
So what we typically do with our clients, and in this case, this is what our fictitious client has done, they've got a sense of what's required by looking at the strategy. So just by knowing that they were going to, in this case, be going to Asia, and that this business was developing so quickly, that strategy really informed the need for growth mindset and informed the need for personal leadership as the 2 planks, if you like. So I guess in answer to the question, it's really being connected to and demonstrating a hypothesis about, okay, our strategy is this, so therefore our talent needs this. And if we have other data with which to supplement that from whatever source. So here, we didn't talk too much about it, but the first step in Q1 was a really robust 360 program. And so clearly that oftentimes in talent programs illustrates where the gaps are, so that can be part of the puzzle. But what we're really encouraging, and what I think is a bit new in what we've talked about this morning, is saving space to let something emerge. I don't know that I've ever really seen that in highly structured programs, where you say, I'm going to generate data through, in this case, 6 months. And that data and feedback is going to aggregate into a need that's common across a population. So I hope that answers the question, but keep typing if not.
We have another question. Can you go into a little bit more detail on the tool that's used for the quarterly polling and data and insights?
Yeah, I don't have lots of content in this pack, but I will describe it for you. So most of you on the call, I'm sure, are familiar with 360 reviews. If you think about this as a very, very focused 360, get to it, there we go, on very specific behaviors. So I'll give you an example from our business at Lighthouse. So at Lighthouse, personal leadership is one of the things that we want to be demonstrating, as well as there's 4 more capabilities. And so the core team at Lighthouse, we use this product called Succeed, which is the product that we developed. And we rate one another on a quarterly basis against these specific behaviors. And part of that process is also telling one another what we think that individual on the team needs to do in the next period, needs to really focus on. And we've chosen quarters as our periods. So I'm always telling my colleagues, hey, here's the data, here's how I see you performing on the behaviors, and here's the 1 or 2 things I really want you to think about and apply in the next quarter. And so about the tool itself, so it's a web-based tool. Happy to talk with you more after the call, but the intention is that it's very focused and that it's very easy for the raters to actually use. And in that way, it's different than a really broad and deep 360, which, as we know, contains 100 questions and takes some real effort to do. And there's great value in those. We're not saying that there's not, but this is a different thing. And we talked a little bit at the start of the call about the anchor point, if you like, for demonstrating a new skill or a new capability is a new behavior. And so to get a different outcome, you need to change your behavior. And that's why, as an organization, we've really doubled down on observable behavior and the ability to help each other through this feedback demonstrate more of what we want. Any other questions before we wrap up? I guess the last thing I'll point out before we wrap up, we really do also believe that growth mindset is probably one of the most versatile and important individual, I guess you could call it a capability for leaders and for people just in general. And we believe that because demonstrating growth mindset is fundamental to learning anything. If you're not too familiar with Carol Dweck's work, this is all about your individual response to challenge, feedback, effort, and frankly, making mistakes, and how we can help each other frame that really drives, the Korn Ferry leadership competency called learning agility. Without growth mindset, it's difficult as a leader to progress your learning agility. And I know there's plenty of HR practitioners on the call, so for a lot of you, that'll actually make sense. Any other things coming through, Carolyn?
Just a couple of requests for more information, so we can send out some more information on Succeed, and also we'll be sending out after the webinar today a presentation pack for everyone.
Yeah, good. Well, let's wrap up then, because who doesn't like 2 minutes back on their Friday morning? What I thought I'd do, we intentionally didn't talk about Lighthouse too much, but I do want you to understand where we work. So we work with leadership teams quite a lot. We work in middle manager populations, and then the focus of our time this morning has been all about key talent or high potential groups. It could be a sales group, but any population that you say is a key talent group. And the when, I think, is quite an interesting, when we step back and said, when do our clients come to us for these types of services? Certainly these are the things that happen in business that lead our clients to come looking for these types of services. So these are our 3 offerings. We don't have 5, we don't have 10, we don't have 1, we have 3, which is leading change, building capability, and developing talent. And on the right-hand side, again, I kicked off our time this morning talking about our collective and my personal passion for data and measurement, and not just ROI is such a topical thing for us as HR practitioners, but it's not just about ROI. It's being able to make better decisions throughout the period, at an individual team and business level, and that's actually what I'm on about. ROI is important professionally, I think, for us as a HR community, but it's really backward looking, and we want to have data that's forward looking that allows us to make shifts through the period. So that's where we work, when we work, and certainly happy to talk more about Succeed. And then just as an easy way to get started, any of those 3 programs or things that we do with lead teams, with manager populations, with key talent groups, they all start in the same way. So we start with our clients to understand where you are now, where you want to be, talk about your behaviors that you want to see, help you identify the best practice behaviors for the capabilities that are most required in your strategy, get a really robust view of what the desired end state is, including how we're going to measure it. And once we're agreed with that, then actually in this half a day, we work backwards. We start with our best practice sort of program flows. We integrate everything that you've already found successful in your business. We come up with, it's not miles deep in terms of detail, but we come up with a plan, if you like, or a roadmap that we collectively believe will get you from A to B. And then out of that as well, where it's required, in most cases it is, there's a business case that accompanies that. So we've got a business case methodology that works against 3 levers that we then equip you with. And so typically these sessions are done with senior HR stakeholders and senior business stakeholders, because one or the other we found just doesn't work. And there's a cost with that, and we think we know the outcomes, the deliverables you get out the back of it are well worth the $4,000, and we apply the $4,000 to your future work with us. So it's really no risk. With that, I think we will wrap up and give everyone 10 minutes back. As Carolyn mentioned, we'll send these a subset of these materials out to you and follow you up accordingly. So have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar.